Hello, I'm Steve. A little about myself. I'm a retired law enforcement officer with 20 years of service. I began my career in the jail, worked the road, and became an investigator. During my career, my training consisted of everything from SWAT to becoming a state certified crime scene technician. I've investigated crimes from thefts to homicides. After retiring and becoming aware of true crime and web sleuths, I started my channel for web sleuths to better understand the perspectives of law enforcement. Not only do we cover true crime, I go out into the field and assist families who have lost loved ones to homicide and their cases are considered cold. Join me as we look and bring attention to these critical cases. Hello, everyone. Glad to see you. If you're new to the channel, welcome. And while you're in chat here, always be mindful and respectful of families, mods, and each other. Tonight, we're going to be talking a little bit about Kohberger and Heuermann and doing some little comparisons and looking at maybe some paths and parallels and others. But before we get started, I want to thank everyone that has sent all the messages and everything with the well wishes due to my dental issue that started up this week and has been fixed and got a few days of healing to go. But as soon as those are over, I'll be back, hopefully 100%. Mrs. Steve has been quite the nurse. Nurse Steve is what I'll be referring to her for the next couple of days. But
Dave wants to know if the tooth fairy showed up.
No, no. I don't know if the dogs or the alarm run him off or Mrs. Steve got him, but Tooth Fairy has failed to show up at this point. But that is great. And like I said, I want to thank everybody. And so we'll get started here. All right. Of course, if you have any information about any of the cases we're talking about or come at this time or in the future, and it just doesn't have to be about a cold case or any individual case we're speaking of. If you know of a crime that needs reported or tipped in about some type of offender, absolutely make sure that is known. But in the case of Matt, Ethan, and Zana, contact the number and make sure law enforcement and prosecution is aware of your information. And also, if you're aware of anything about this individual, I looked for a tip line on him and I couldn't find anything on Heuermann as far as Long Island tip line coming in, but 911, FBI, any of those numbers will absolutely get you to someone that will connect you to the proper authorities and make sure any of your tips are found. And if you want to be anonymous, of course, you can send it to our tip line, which is
tips@truecrimeweb.com.
Yes, very difficult to read.
That is hard.
That is hard for me. All right. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
How did we come up with that unique name? Oh, okay.
All by myself.
Okay.
What do you want to if you have a tip?
Yes, absolutely. But anyway, first, like I said, we have two offenders that went out and absolutely targeted some victims that did not deserve in any shape, form, or fashion. And we have victims, of course, Kohberger's victims were simple college students going about enjoying their life, doing what they were trying to do to progress their life and live a full and, getting an education so that they could be the best person they could be. Then, of course, we have another offender. We have a Heuermann that he also targeted victims, females, but those victims were also females, but they had chosen a certain path in life. But regardless of what path they went, they didn't deserve what happened to them. And so when we're looking at these two, we can't say that, well, these people here were less desirable, and so therefore they should be looked at differently. That's not the case. When you have offenders such as these that target these innocent victims, now some victims may put themselves in a higher risk environment and these crimes occur to them. but that has nothing to do with, or shouldn't have any shape, form, or factor in how we weigh that they shouldn't have been victimized by these individuals. But now, Mrs. Steve here in a minute is going to be mentioning something about his eyes. And
Well, I have to fess up about something.
okay.
So Friday,
Uh-huh.
you were recovering, and I did my blog
Mm-hmm.
on eyes.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen that. Okay. Okay.
So
All right.
both this dude and Rex, top.
Okay. And but we when we were doing the thumbnail tonight, and we had them, we had Kohberger um, lined up with Rex, and it almost when you put them side by side, and it's just by chance of the similarities between the two. It looks like one is a younger version of the other, and that's just a coincidence. And but still, it's something that Mrs. Steve made a note of, and I said, yeah, I can see where you can go with that. But anyway, this individual, and the reason I put his date of birth in here is due to that when the crimes occurred, um, he's around 28 years of age, and when currently right now he's 29 years of age, and we have to look at Heuermann, who is my age. Actually, he's a little bit younger, born in '64. Um, and we look at one of the first victims. And the reason I brought in his age and everything is that these serial offenders, that when you if you go out there and do any type of research and type in the average age of when a serial offender starts, known victims, because not always the first known victims that are known to us are the first victims. And there's other type of crimes that might feed into their fantasy of where they were commit certain acts that, while not as bad as the homicides, but they're extremely vile, and it absolutely destroys victims' lives. And so a lot of times we don't know exactly who are some of the first victims. But the reason that we look at his age, and that he's currently right at 60 years of age, will be within a few months, that um, individuals generally do not start at 60 years of age becoming a serial offender. And when you go back and you look at, I did some research of the top 50 average age of a serial offender when he's identified having first victims, and you'll see most of them are in their 20s to 30s, early 30s. And of course, you'll have outliers. You'll have, of course, some that start a little bit younger, and you'll have some that start a little bit older. But generally, if you took all those ages, and I will add them all up, and I will get that exact average age, I think of the top 50, and I'll have that number for you on my next show. I just didn't have time tonight when I was thinking about that, and I, of course, didn't create a slide for this show for that. But um, and when we look at the differences of this, that if Kohberger is 28 to 29 years of age when he is first recognized as having his victims, we have to go back and look at Rex. And uh, one of the first victims that this victim hasn't been linked to him at this time was the Fire Island remains, who was just identified either yesterday or the day before. Um, and I have a slide of her, but that she, her remains were found in '96, and Rex would have been 32 at the time. And so he falls into that early days, and probably pretty well exactly where most of these offenders um, start, or we have their first associations of certain victims. Now, will they find older victims on this stretch of highway and on other areas that could be associated to him? I believe so. I think that, just my opinion, that he started prior to that, and that he has additional victims. Maybe not, but I absolutely think that's a possibility because of the location of where the victim is, and the time frame of how many years and how many other areas could he have dumped victims that may have not been discovered at this time or haven't been discovered along that stretch of highway, because you could go from one end of that island to the other on that one highway, and he may have other out there, and we'll just have to see what time tells. But of course, her partial remains weren't discovered, and some of them until 2011, and the so that when you start finding that, even in this one case, you have remains that's found over a 15-year period, because some of them were found in 96, some of them were found in 2011, and so that tells you that there's the possibility that there's others out there that are still, because out of one victim, two locations, which is very odd. Why would they be in two different locations? And what were they trying to do? And what occurred? Were certain parts or during the dismemberment were they kept, and for what purpose? When you talk about these individuals and the crimes that they commit and how they act, you can't rationalize what's going through their minds and what they're doing. And of course, this is the victim of the number 7, that her DNA profile was suitable, and for the genealogical match. And of course, she's been identified as Karen Brigada. And I actually think they did pretty well on the sketch. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And that's, you see so many sketches out there sometimes, and these forensic artists, and there's different types of forensic people out there. Some work with clay, some are artists, and sometimes they're pretty close. Absolutely amazing at the skill set it would take to do that, because when you're looking at skeletal remains, I was looking at some yesterday on a cold case I've about to start working on, and it's absolutely amazing of that, just looking at bone and what bone can tell you about the structures and things. But and but I'm glad that they were able to do with the modern technology of the DNA of finding out who she is, and so that might bring some comfort to the families that this is what happened and where she's at, and they don't have to worry about um, her, anymore. But of course, the family will be greatly impacted, and we have to always think of them. But some of the comparisons that law enforcement will face on any crime, it's just not with what would happen with Kohberger, and it's not just um, with Heuermann. That these individuals, that they go out there and they have certain victims that they target, and there's certain and what drives them to target, and how do they learn that and educate themselves of the steps needed. Sometimes criminals have absolutely terrible choices of victims, and they mess up hugely early on in their career. And when we look at Kohberger, we can say that law enforcement did a spectacular job as far as, if Kohberger is who they say he is, and he is the offender of that crime, just as with Rex Heuermann, if he is the one and he's guilty of the crimes that he's accused of, because we got two individuals that's almost in the, or they are in the exact boat. Both of them right now are only been charged with. They haven't went through the court system, so they're only being accused of it now. But we have to look at the probable cause affidavits, and which lead me as a law enforcement officer to have a bias and say that yes, I can understand the probable cause. with some of the evidence that they have. And both of them, there's some comparisons that we can do on the two cases here, and we'll talk about them a little bit. But when we're talking about these cases, of course, these are just some of the topics that law enforcement will look at and things that I look at and analyze and think about. And there's no way I can put that I can get my checklist off my homicide book and tell you everything that we look at in a 30-minute presentation. It'd be impossible because there's so many details and so many things that law enforcement looks at when they get on a scene. It's absolutely. Mrs. Steve found something.
Look at what Copper Horse did.
What did she do?
Are you kidding me?
Thank you, Copper Horse. That's very sweet of you. Appreciate it. Mrs. Steve.
Boy, you would have blew my tooth fairy right out of the water.
Yes, I was expecting.
Amazing.
Yes. And I think I just said that whatever you did, I was going to require you to do 10 times that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Copper Horse. That's amazing. That anyway. That'll help out greatly on a trip I'm about to take. Thank you. Absolutely awesome.
Too funny.
But anyway, law enforcement has to look at so many things. And when we find a victim, until we get that victimology and understand that victimology and the difference of the victimologies of Kohberger's victims and the victimologies of Heuermann's victims, opposite poles, as far as some of the things of their life and where they were at going, getting a advanced educational college degrees versus that others were into escorts. And so it's totally opposite of the board. And so we have certain risk factors that you would think that the victims in college, of course, and they were low risk individuals. Now they may have went out and had a nightlife in certain environments, but everything they did, even in those environments, that they stuck together. More than one went to wherever they were at the bar that night, and they left together. Got driver, drove them home, and so everything they did, they tried to protect themselves, and so that their risk was lower than what someone would be that was just individual walking a dark street. And then, of course, you go to the other end of the board where the escorts, where they are working solo and they're going off with these individuals one-on-one, and where certain crimes can be committed, and they did fall victim to an offender that absolutely took advantage of their lifestyle. And then we have to look at the times of these criminal acts, and qualifying what the times are is that for these offenders to have committed these crimes, and just not committing the crime itself, but this disposal of the crime scene, or getting to the crime scene, leaving the crime scene, transporting the victim to the final disposal areas, all has to happen at a certain time frame for these individuals. And they're very similar, that both of them were working in those early morning hours. Whereas there's low traffic, that if you are transporting a victim, or if you're in any type of committing any type of criminal act, there's fewer eyes out there that are awake. You're using the cloak of darkness as a defense so that you're not easily seen. You've got your vehicle, of course, that has headlights and lights all over it, but law enforcement, we can't see into that car very well. So we can't, we don't have a lot of things, plus abilities to identify. And as long as you're obeying the law and you're within, and you don't do something that throws up a red flag and says, hey, come look at me, I'm a bad guy. Law enforcement, until we have probable cause to suspect you of something, articulable cause, that we can make a traffic stop or something in those early morning hours, we still can't, until we have some type of reason, we don't have the right to go out there and just stop people driving on the road. And so as long as the criminals are mindful of certain acts and the laws, that they could drive up and down a road with 10 bodies in the trunk and we wouldn't know any difference. And so they use that darkness, and they're very mindful of themselves. Not all of them. I love working those hours for the fact that the chance of running across certain individuals that was in our area, from the robbery suspects to the ones that the burglar suspects that went into industrial areas, enjoyed working that type of crime. And also realizing that you are able to interact with them, and occasionally you'll get a good hit on one of these type of criminals. And then, of course, it can lead on further into other investigations. And at some point, I'll do a show about some of those cases that we worked and criminal interactions. But the time frames, like I said, Kohberger from the 2 to 3 o'clock area. And it wouldn't shock me or surprise me that Rex wasn't out there after the midnight hour in that morning watch time. And that's when he was getting rid of his victims, because you can't just carry a victim in broad daylight across any type of area from the trunk or from the bed of a vehicle or hatchback, whatever type of vehicle you're using. You just can't readily reach in there and carry a victim and toss over on the side of the road in daylight hours. Just won't work out for you. And so I would absolutely expect that Heuermann would have made the most of those late dark hours, early morning hours. But we'll also see that the similarities of how these individuals will be tracked and what type of contacts they made with the victim and how they'll be brought up and be used against them in court. We're going to see that digital footprint. We're going to see their phone records, cell tower. Some of the cell tower, of course, when we look at Heuermann way back when some of these crimes occurred, the records probably won't exist. Some of them may, but it probably won't be very clear. What he did since then, such as the interest in the investigations, and we can also note that Kohberger had a similar interest from speaking with neighbors and asking questions and talking about the crime, that we're probably going to see a lot of similarities of how much interest each of these individuals showed. And there's that I'm sure Kohberger didn't open up any of his conversations with the people that spoke with him about crimes. He didn't open up, hey, what do you think about the Long Island serial offender? And the reverse of that, I'm sure that Heuermann didn't wake up and talk to a bunch of people and say, hey, what did you think about the Idaho 4? That each of them only spoke about the crimes that they were interested in. And those are the crimes that they're victims. It's something that they had a personal connection with, personal understanding with, and that they wanted to find out and keep track of that. And you'll see generally in almost all your profiles of your FBI that they'll discuss in those news briefings that this individual will speak and keep track and pay a lot of attention to the media and social media of what's going on with their specific case. And we're going to see probably far more of that with Rex than any other individual, because it's already been put out there, and you can see that he did absolutely pay a lot of attention to that. And then we have to look at what the DNA is. Both of them, the DNA is going to be a huge part of their cases. Of course, with Rex Heuermann, we have known from the victims those hairs. And with Kohberger, we have the blood that was on the knife sheath. And so both of them is going to have trace evidence linking from the suspect aspect to the victims. And that's going to be huge, that those DNA profiles will be in there. At some point, do I expect that, and do I hope that they find the reversal Absolutely. And will they on both of these cases? It's possible. It just depends at what stage the CSI is out there and what they're doing. And of course, as we spoke about the digital footprint, that's going to pay a huge of the later victims for Rex of what that digital footprint is. And it may, in his case, possibly link him to more recent victims. And where was he at during certain times? What was he doing with those burner phones? Where was he at? What trips did he make? What parts of the country was he in? Whereas they may be able to associate through his digital footprint, cellular, um, uh, uh, and also his checking, any financials that would link him to a certain area when people came up missing. And what will they do with that? And will there be any links to any other dumping grounds that are discovered or have been discovered, but there's been no connection between Rex and them or the Long Island serial offender with any other victims in other states. So we'll have to see where the digital footprint takes us on that. Whereas with Kohberger, they will do the same thing. Um, but all of this is in the wheelhouse of the CSI. This is uh, what we have come to. How many shows are out there that we can turn on? I guarantee you right now, there's probably 2 or 3 series of CSI shows that will be on tonight. They're weekly, and uh, and so it's become a part of our lives. We understand so much more about crime scene investigations um, and we expect so much more from our law enforcement, which is a great thing. For the fact that the more that we expect from them, the higher they have to perform, and we absolutely need that, want that, and have to have that because we want that performance. Because the better they do their jobs, and the higher standard or the higher standard that we hold them to, will make sure that we do see justice for far more victims than what we would have expected 20 or 30 years ago. And we should always do that. And then, of course, a lot of these victims may or may not have been known that they were being stalked or victims of stalking. And we just don't understand that, uh, there was Kohberger that one of his victims felt that there was stalking involved and had mentioned it. And of course, where will that come into the court case? And is it true? We'll have to find that out. And now with um, Rex, we don't know when he interactions with some of the victims that he's known to have and has already been charged with, and what interactions did he have, and how long did he have interactions before he committed this final horrendous homicide with each of the victims, because he may have been involved with them on numerous occasions and something triggered him at a certain point, or he was working towards this single goal. And all these offenders, like I said, we can't make sense of how they think and what their goal is and how they target and how they everything about their lives. And they have one mission, that whatever it is in their narcissistic world of feeding their fantasy, and they go out there and find these victims and they attack them, and eventually uh, we have these homicides, and then we have dumping grounds. And do I think that um, Kohberger, from that standpoint, is a younger version that if law enforcement hadn't found him and charged him, that I absolutely think that in about 20 something years, 30 years, that we would be looking at a similar path and reverse engineer um, Heuermann and go back to that time frame. And I'm sure he made some mistakes early on in those early victims, and due to the technologies or whatever happened with those early investigations, he was missed. And I think that those paths would look very similar. I'm just speculating. I think, and that's just my opinion. But I think there's a lot of similarities between the two. It's just that one of them his mistakes caught up early on in his career, and one of them, it didn't catch up to him until now with the technologies we have, and so we have to absolutely appreciate that. All right, we got any questions?
You do, but we're going to start with some blue lights.
All right.
All right. We got Brenda Birkenbach donated a membership.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Katie Lynn donated 5 memberships. Thank you so much. All right. So now let me catch up here.
Mrs. Steve, so happy to get her blue light back.
I love my blue light. Let's see here. Normal. Okay. So I think we're good there. All right. So the first one is going to be from Molly at True Crime Web. Apparently, RH started shoplifting around age 11, based on an interview with a person who went to school with him, played dangerous prank on girl in high school also. Oh, that wasn't a question.
Yeah. Well,
My bad.
But there is some commonalities and certain traits about these individuals, and that when you look at some of these serial offenders, there's been several serial offenders that were caught due to the fact that they'd go in and they have these sticky fingers and they have to steal, and they go in and of course they get caught. And I think Bundy was one, and I'm trying to think an Asian guy that him and his partner was I can't think of his name, but he was caught dudes trying to steal from a hardware store. But these offenders, some of them do have that one common part of their life, that they're thieves, and it's just part of their life and part of their psyche.
All right. And from Rosemarie, Steve, do you believe that the victims, can I say that word? Dismembered?
Yes.
Were dismembered, were done while he was younger, and the ones found later and intact was the reason his MO changed due to his older age?
Probably so. And it changed that he may have went through a very, trying to figure out the human anatomy or feeding whatever part of his fantasy was at that time, and it may have changed, and it may be done that it changed for the fact that doing that act is extremely messy, and it exposes you to far more dangers of being discovered, for the fact that the more interactions you have during that process, the more blood spatter, the more opportunity for transfer of DNA both ways, trace evidence both ways to be made, and that if you're transporting them is something that he may not have been able to package, and found out that this just doesn't work. Yes, anytime you transport, sometimes you have to ick. But yeah, I mean, that could be one reason he changed it. I don't know. There's probably a lot of psychological reasons of, as they age out of certain things, that that he no longer interests him. He went to another act that may be more violent, that we just don't know about what he was doing, and we'll just have to see.
All right. And Anna answered your question. Lake
Yes.
and Ng.
Yes, and
Lake caught shoplifting and he swallowed cyanide. Joseph D'Angelo, Night Stalker, had a history of shoplifting.
Yes, that was the one. I think he was in the hardware trying to steal a vice or something, and a crazy nut. But on so many levels, not just being a thief, but yes.
All right. So Rosemary, we did. Okay. Little off topic.
Mm-hmm.
You good?
Sure.
All right. Love to hunt. Mr. Steve, do you think this was RA's and BK's first, and Elizabeth and Lyric's
offenders first?
Offenders first.
I think all of them had crimes that are supporting crimes, certain acts and certain night lives and certain fantasies and certain things that they may have done younger that led up to these. But uh, do I think, as far as Richard Allen's first and BK's, at their ages, I do think that they probably will be other victims discovered, um, more so for Richard Allen than BK. Um, but I do think that there is a possibility that it won't be their first. Um, but, like I said, just don't have the information. Do I think Elizabeth and Lyric's first? Um, no, I do not. As far as now, it could be their first homicide, but I do not think it was their first victims. Uh, I think that there would have been other young children that were victimized, but it could be that uh, with Elizabeth and Lyric that it might have been the first homicides. And I would, if I had more information about the crime scene and certain things that may have occurred at the crime scene for Elizabeth and Lyric, I would be able to give you a better answer. But we know nothing about the crime scene, and certain things from the crime scene can tell you, is this a first victim or not? And we just don't know.
Okay.
They're killing you.
No, that's a name.
Oh,
I already did that
uh
one.
huh.
All right. Steve, do you think it's possible RH had someone who set up the communications between some of the victims?
Absolutely. I do think that they're going to go back and look at some of these escorts services and individuals that may have made phone calls or interactions, and because these escorts, um, they don't always are solo. They have individuals that are part of the trafficking scene, and I'm sure law enforcement will follow up on that and see who those other victims. And some of the women's interactions that Rex would have had with other women, of course, they're coming forward and they're going to talk to law enforcement, and they're going to identify the exact people you're talking about, that who will set up these communications and how were interactions set up and how many of those people. Because when you start talking to these individuals that set up these encounters, and they ask him how many other women um, have just disappeared over the years, with or without contacting you, and just disappeared, and we don't know about anymore. Because I think that may eventually lead up to some more victims.
Uh-oh.
What?
You're waiting on me?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Mrs. Steve is multitasking.
Story of my life. But I make a dang good one.
You do.
All right. That go there. And Miranda at True Crime Web. It's devastating to me that RH is nearly 60 years old and has had an entire lifetime to offend. That is gross. That makes me sick to my stomach. Do you really think he waited until his 30s to start? I thought earlier.
And yes, and I can't disagree with you. I tend to agree that I think he probably did start earlier than that. It's just that this is the first victim that we know of from this. I'm not saying that he waited till his 30s, but even if he did, he's still going to be within that same time frame as far as being a serial offender. But um, but no, I'm not saying that this is when he started. But I do believe that he probably did have other victims prior to, um, and they're going to be going out. And if so, I would expect that those early victims, and you for it to be linked to him, you would have to find other victims that suffered the same type of injuries and um, and dismemberment for it to be linked to him. But they will probably do so, and they'll be looking at those, especially those. for the fact that if this one is linked to him on the Long Island, I would expect that all the other victims in those early days was had similar issues. Okay,
Mm. All right. Off topic.
sure.
All right. Off topic, Miranda. I have to ask, is there any news on Evansdale?
Um, no, not really. I did speak to, or I text Drew today, but it was just about some future things that we're going to be doing and talking about. And but no, there's nothing new that I know of. I've been hoping, but we'll just have to see.
And see, you're killing me, Smalls, I
Mm.
think. Are you retired law enforcement?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Up, blue lights, and purple puddles. I
Yes.
love your name.
Thank you. Appreciate your support. And for your, Are You Killing Me Smiles? Just go back and watch the introduction. It has my pictures and everything.
Oh yeah.
And if send me an email sometime, be glad to talk to you.
All right. And happy 11 months membership,
Thank you.
Shelley.
Appreciate that.
Say
Appreciate your
thank
support.
you. All right. And from Janet, do you think they found evidence in his vault or garden? I certainly hope so.
I do. I do. I think some of the things that they were bagging up and where they were digging in the yard, and you saw all these almost, I think it's more like cloth or clothing. I'm hoping it's burlap sacks. That's what I'm hoping. But I don't know. But it did have the abilities that it could have been that. And if so, they'll, of course, CSI and the lab will do their work and do their specialty. And hopefully that will link him up and be a part of what the DA was talking about, a mountain of evidence. And if that's part of that mountain, and some of those items are recovered from his yard that's buried, and that would just be another nail in the coffin against him.
All right. And from You're Killing Me, what if he dumped the dismembered body in one place in the water and parts of it floated adrift? Hence, we found skulls.
It's possible. Absolutely, there can be that, and there may be many victims that are within those water areas.
Yeah, and who was it that mentioned the hurricanes up in that area
Yes,
too? I mean, that could have.
yes
Somebody
during
mentioned it
yeah,
tonight too, but
yeah,
I can't. Was it Dave?
it
Did
could,
they, I think I don't know.
but
Somebody did.
just as we've seen out west, when all these lakes and reservoirs lose and they go down to their lowest point in 20, 30, 40 years, the discovery of new victims of crimes and missing persons that are discovered happens. And can that be the case up there? Absolutely. There's no telling how many victims and how many bodies that if all the waterways were drained and looked at, that you would find due to um, all different types of acts.
Okay, and off topic, sees through. Do you think it was daylight when Elizabeth and Lyric were taken to the discovery site?
I do. I do. The abduction happened during daylight, and if you go by the numbers of the of statistically of what time frame and when certain things happens with these victims, that yes, I believe so.
All right. Do we want to mention Rex's daughter? I don't think so.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to. I appreciate the about some of the family members, but we really don't ever focus on any of the family members unless they were a suspect in it, and so we just don't highlight any of that. But appreciate
All
the
right.
point.
Do you want a Delphi case question?
Sure.
All right, here's a question on the Delphi case from Sees Through. If you were getting the search warrant for the Delphi case, would you include the missing underwear and sock? Is it strange that it is not included in Rick's search warrant?
While they're there, yeah, I probably would have mentioned that. Yes, we were looking for that because when you're looking for certain items, you can look at in within any place that might conceal those items. And that'd been the only reason I would have specifically named it, because in what area could you hide a sock? In what area could you hide a piece of underwear? And so you can go in there and virtually look in anything that you could get a pair of underwear or a sock in, and open it up and look for it, as long as it's in the curtilage of the residence, vehicles, properties, whatever your parameters you set for that search warrant. And I would have mentioned it. But they mentioned a lot of other different things, and it was, pretty um, detailed, um, and I can't argue with it. And I hope they have some great evidence. So we'll just have to see.
Okay. All right, let me go cruising here. Thank you, Gail. She grabbed a true crime mug.
Excellent.
All right, and you were done.
All right, guys. Appreciate it. I'm still recovering. Hopefully, I'll get back all of my feeling pretty quick. It may take me another few days, but I absolutely think. And the Tooth Fairy was extremely nice to me. I hate that we've blown the Tooth Fairy's cover. Now everybody knows that the Tooth Fairy rides a copper horse. And they so but we absolutely appreciate everybody, and thank y'all uh, for all y'all support, for the gifted memberships and things, and for watching, viewing. Give it a thumbs up if you like the video, share it, and subscribe, and we appreciate it. And y'all stay safe out there, and we'll see y'all soon.
All right, y'all take care. Love y'all. Thank you, mods. You're the best.